Hello, welcome to SHOWstudio. We're here today to discuss Comme de Garçons Homme Plus. Let's just crack on, shall we, with our introductions at the far end.
I'm Rob Nowill. I'm a writer and editor.
And I'm Jeffrey Horsley. I'm a researcher at the Centre for Fashion Curation at London College of Fashion.
I'm Connor Ives. I am a first year, or just finished my first year of women's wear at Central St. Martin's.
And I'm Finn Mactaggart, and I don't have much more to say than that. So thinking about Comme, and as much as it's been in the press a lot this year, one thing that seemed to come up for me was this idea that Comme was sort of a brand that was a bit beyond criticism, sort of fetishization of Comme. I wondered if I could get your takes on Comme as a brand beyond criticism.
I totally agree with that. I think even even functioning within the, the industry, or even saying that, you would never kind of question that, because she serves as this kind of could you say motherly figure? Even just in the kind of I guess fashion philanthropy even that she can kind of do and stuff. But it's definitely a point. I mean, I think people would definitely be afraid to even question it. I'd be afraid to question it, but we'll see.
It's interesting though, because it's different from, I think you could say that something like Prada in a way is beyond criticism. That's also because it's such a commercial powerhouse of a brand, so people actually are afraid to criticize a brand like Prada because it has a huge advertising budget and it has a lot of power. And obviously Comme is a very big brand as well, but I think it has a different place. It's kind of assumed that she knows what she's doing at all times. So even if you look at a show and think, that's not for me, people will always assume that everyone else is going to catch up eventually. She's really seen as the innovator. So if you don't get it, then you must be thick.
Yeah.
So whether they are beyond criticism or not, is being beyond criticism a positive or a negative thing? And isn't there a question around the value of criticism in the relation to fashion, the fashion industry? And if you're beyond bad criticism, maybe that's a good place to be.
I mean, it's interesting you brought up Prada. I guess these are both brands that are seen as very intellectual brands, and like you say, that informs how people maybe feel a bit shy about criticizing a brand. They are the thick ones, they don't get it, or something like this.
It's quite consistent as well. I mean, where even her women's collections, while each season will kind of be a different theme or a different kind of driving force, even just the consistency of it, it's not something where she kind of reverses it and will kind of do a complete 180. It's I think with the Comme show, you can walk into it and kind of almost expect a certain level of it. You kind of know what you're going to get. Whereas I think something with Prada, it's a lot more driven by sort of maybe more of an aesthetic or a destination that I think. Then there, a Mucha collection will come out and you can kind of be hate it, and then days later be in love with it. And that's kind of what happens to me. Whereas I think with Rei's work, it's a bit more, I'm always, floored by it and shocked by it every time, but I think you can look at it and be okay, yes, that is a Rei collection.
I'm going to ask again, so is being beyond criticism a good or a bad thing?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
I guess I'm trying to say that it is a bad thing, and I think we kind of need to readjust how we talk about Comme, particularly this year. I remember growing up with Comme as this kind of, this brand that was totally aspirational, just the most fantastic example of kind of avant-garde, and the progressive in fashion. And I've really seen, I suppose, this year with things like the Met Gala, some of Dover Street Market's latest ventures, it seems to be perhaps a brand that's compromising itself quite a lot. And I think a renewed critical voice on what Comme is doing and where it sits might be relevant. You've seen the Met exhibition, so I'm going to pick on you a bit.
That's fine. I mean, the word compromise, I think, is really relevant, because before I saw the exhibition, I saw in a bookshop the catalogue, and I hadn't even considered that there would be a catalogue, and of course there is going to be a catalogue. And as soon as I saw the catalogue, I felt like my sense of Comme had been soiled somehow. That by going along with the most basic conventions of an institution, they'd actually let go of the uncompromising nature that I thought was at the absolute fundamental basis of their brand. And it was a really powerful reaction. I saw the catalogue, and it's a beautiful catalogue, but I thought, oh, Comme's done a catalogue. And I think the whole show stinks of compromise in a way. Stinks is the wrong word. Demonstrates compromise. And I think it was well documented in interviews with Rei Kawakubo, the issues that she had. You know, she only wanted to show the past 8 collections and in their entirety. And the Met just kind of couldn't go along with that. And so, you know, working with someone like the Met, there's always going to be compromise. But then my question, I suppose, is how does that impact on a brand that's about being uncompromising?
I suppose, but they've also, I mean, without completely blaming the Met, there's also been a lot of changes in how Comme communicates lately, what it stocks in Dover Street Market. I think a lot has to do with where Gosha kind of took off and took Dover Street, which, you know, I was very excited by Gosha when it came out. I was very excited by the kind of Eastern take on, or the East European take on Western skate culture. And I know Comme has been interested in kind of, I'm thinking of like the Tbilisi shoot that Rei did. But that really took Dover Street in quite a, I don't know, urban outfitters-y kind of direction, where you see brands like Palace being stocked in there, and the customer becomes very, very different all of a sudden.
But that's a bad thing, though. I think the one issue or bugbear I always had with Dover Street is it felt so 80s in a way, like this terrifying, intimidating. But, you know, if you don't understand Walter van Beirendonck and Comme and Junior, then you know the staff are not going to smile at you. Or, you know, it was always, I found that very old-fashioned, and I think actually Dover Street has been one of the brands that's really evolved, and the fact that they now do streetwear, they do sneakers, they'll do collabs, they do. I think it's actually much more modern than if they just said, no, we're only going to sell 3-sleeve togas by Rick Owens and nothing else. Like that feels like it's a bit of a thing of the past. So I don't know. I never really thought of it as a compromise. Obviously, it is a commercial move, but it doesn't feel like it's selling out.
It speaks to their, I think, business model as well, because I think what, you know, Rei kind of gets acclaimed for is kind of, you know, still being able to, you know, present what she presents, you know, and it be completely unwearable or, you know, unsellable, but they can still put out those objects or those, you know, those garments and stuff because they know that they have a basement that's fully stocked with, you know, Adidas trainers, you know, and they know that people are gonna, you know, show up. So I think we're back at the same question again of, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And I think it's you know, I think at the end of the day, fashion is a business, you know, and I think how you navigate that is something that I think a lot of people are still figuring out because it's, you know, also still kind of a fairly new thing, this kind of aggressive platform of kind of, you know, just everything's out there and you're just bombarded by it. They have an Instagram now, I think, even, you know, Comme des Garçons, you know, it's like, I saw that, I think, a few months ago and was kind of like, that was shocking to me because that sort of felt like something that would never even happen. Or
why? I guess I wonder why that's shocking. Like, I mean, yes, they're different in terms of their design aesthetic from any other brand, but they live in the world. They're a brand that exists in 2017. You know, should they just pretend it's still 1988 or whatever, and you know, keep doing the same thing? You know, like I think that would be really sad if there was no way for them to move what they're doing into this millennium.
And if you look at those changes from an economic perspective and see them as almost like a different kind of guerrilla store, you know, the guerrilla stores were an economic model that was revolutionary at a certain point. Maybe what Dover Street and Comme des Garçons are doing with the business at the moment is a shift in a direction that makes some people feel uncomfortable because you felt what they used to do, you've held it very dear. And sometimes that kind of shift or change in a direction you're not happy with makes you feel dislocated from it. So I think, yeah, from a business perspective, I think it's a move. It's a move in a different direction, and it's challenging some of the customers. I mean, I certainly remember a point where I felt uncomfortable going into Dover Street, but I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. You know, there's got to be a point where I feel less comfortable.
I just think that's suicide. You know, you've heard about Yoji store, I can't remember, is it on Conduit Street?
Yeah.
Always empty. There's rails and rails of black, you know, huge parachute bin bag clothes. And, you know, Yoji's one of my favourite designers of all time ever. I think it's incredible. But that store is terrifying. I wouldn't walk in there and buy anything. You know you can't afford anything. You know you can't really try anything on. You know the staff aren't going to say hello to you. And that's why that store is on its arse. You know, I think the reason that Dover Street is surviving and makes the money to maintain the progressive designers they sell is because they've thought, well, actually, there's a huge captive audience of people who are queuing outside Supreme on a Thursday afternoon every week. Like, why don't we bring some of those people in? And actually, that's quite radical, I think.
Well, what's quite interesting, I think, about that customer is a lot of them are male. You know, Comme des Garçons is all about... well, we often talk about it in the context of the way they revolutionize how women dress, but I kind of want to touch on Comme's man. I think of people like John Hurt or Basquiat or those kind of figures that were in their shows. I think we've got some imagery to go with this discussion. What do we think of Comme's man and how that is changing?
Well, it's interesting that both of those people you said are from some time ago.
Okay, there's a bit of a theme going on
Who's
with my...
their man today? Like, you know, and I think actually they don't have just one guy anymore. Like, I know men in their 60s who buy the tailoring every season and only wear the black stuff. I know guys who are 17 and go buy the t-shirt with a love heart on it. I think they're really... It's become a very broad brand in a way that a lot of brands have failed to do. Actually, everybody feels like they connect to it. You know, people who are very fashion think they see something in it, and people who don't know anything about fashion think it's just a cool brand that does t-shirts with love hearts on. I think that's really smart.
I feel like every season as well, there's like there's a new line even of Comme des Garçons. You know, it's like Comme des Garçons is one of the other ones. I think it's maybe women's and men's, you know, and they do, again, quite consistent collections, you know, where it's not the women's ready-to-wear, you know, it's not, you know, these huge shapes and stuff, but it's pieces that I always look at and I'm very kind of attracted to, even with the men's as well. I mean, I think, again, it's that, the word that I keep saying is like consistency. You know, if you go back kind of even to the 80s and the 90s, you know, what she was doing for Basquiat, I think Lou even posted a photo today. It was like McQueen walking the show, and I think like that was, I mean, that's great as well, because it's quite even a bit cheeky, you know, it's kind of like, I remember seeing that and like liking the look, liking the clothing, and then liking kind of even the sentiment that's behind it. You know, I like that she could kind of get these figures, you know, to walk her show, because it is something like Comme des Garçons, you know, it's...
But it's funny that now that idea of having, I hate the word, influencers, walking in your show is the ultimate kind of naff cliche, like...
Yeah.
You know, think of Dolce or like, you know, when obviously Prada.
It's because the influencers of today are a bit naff for the influencers of then.
Made in Chelsea.
It's a bit different from like Westwood walking for Yoji.
But it's, I mean, all of those things again feel like they started at Comme, but like, are they relevant anymore? Like, do they just feel like gimmicks now? Like,
I suppose what I see as gimmicky and I guess lazy is to kind of cash in on simply your name and to stick it over product in order to shift it. And that, I suppose you can call that keeping up with the times and giving people what they want and keeping a business going through turbulent times. I guess that just seems very easy to me.
Yeah, I guess. I suppose I always think it's a miracle that Dover Street Market exists at all and still exists. You know, after years, it's still there. It still has the most progressive fashion selection in London. And actually, you know, there's so many stores that have been doing things for a lot less daring that have died along the way. And so I think the fact that they've managed to find a way to make this work is, I think, more power to them. Like, good for them. Got to do what you got to do.
Are we Dover Street Market shoppers on this panel?
Less.
Yeah, I'm the same. I used to shop there very regularly. I used to get incredibly excited by Market, and now I'm not interested in going in and looking at this huge gaudy Gucci display.
The scones have got much smaller.
The what?
The scones have got much smaller.
I was gonna say.
But then is that to do with them, or is that to do with you as a customer changing or getting older or shifting focus as well?
I'm not getting older, just.
So I'm getting older, and I know it is definitely to do. There's a younger element introduced, I think, into the new Dover Street that didn't used to be so prevalent in the old Dover Street. And again, I think that, to bring in a new energy, however you do it, if it's through Palace or however, there's something slightly commendable about that. You're challenging your own status quo.
Yeah, I think it's clever, and it's funny you said Gucci, because actually Gucci's the other store that now has queues outside on the weekend of kids, and they can't even afford to buy anything, but they are just sitting in there and hanging out. Like, Gucci's done something, whether you like the clothes or not, which is, to be separate matter. They've connected with kids in a way that, with the next generation of customers, in a way that loads of brands who think they are young haven't. And I think Dover Street's the same thing, where actually they've found a way of resonating. Because people see through it if they were doing it in a really transparent, lame way. Those kids who want to come in and buy the trainers and read Hypebeast and want the new Goscety would not be going there. Loads of shops they're not going to.
And isn't that physically articulated in the store itself? Because they all go downstairs, and then everything else happens upstairs, and it's almost as if there's a spatial division between those different worlds.
That's what I was even saying before. I mean, it's their business model. I mean, because when I even last went to Dover Street, I'll never go to the basement. I go straight for the things that I could never buy.
And it's quite funny when you suddenly leave that kind of party kids floor where
silent,
and then you get upstairs and it's like Celine.
I was going to say, I go straight for the Celine couch. I'll just sit there for like a few minutes and I'll just be like, okay, just take it in for a bit. But it's funny because even in school, they'll say to us, which was always, I guess, a bit against what I would say if I was in that position, but I always had tutors that would say, go to Dover Street, go and touch the clothes, go look at them, this and that. And maybe it's kind of me saying like, well, you can't go look at other clothes to, make new clothes. But I guess if you haven't had that relationship to it yet, I mean, what we're even saying before, it is like, it's an open space. Anyone can go in there and anyone can look at those items in, maybe it's not the most approachable setting, but in a much more approachable setting than if you were to go into more maybe of like a flagship store, the Yoji store that you were talking about. Just because, I mean, all of the even customer experiences that I've had in Dover Street have always been pleasant. Like, I don't think they go out of their way to kind of create this kind of, air about the place. And maybe it's just been my experience, but I think it is a much more pleasant experience than, some of the other store settings that we've been talking about.
I remember in Dover Street when you couldn't take photographs. Imagine how that would go now with social media. I mean, it would just be impossible, wouldn't it? But certainly in the
Or
original.
even when they didn't have the logo on the shop, did they not? They initially didn't have that there, and you had to find it, exactly. I mean, I suppose, there's something of that excites me about, that level of aspiration about the clothes that used to excite me that doesn't really exist anymore. It's been quite demystified.
And possibly it doesn't excite you because you can have those clothes now. So in the sense that, well, I don't know your life. In the sense that, in the way, I remember being 18 and going to stores like Dover Street, whatever, and being like, oh, this is Comme des Garçons in real life, this is so exciting. Whereas now, it's much more tangible because we can all afford to buy it if we want to buy it. You can go and shop it anywhere, you can see it online anywhere. So maybe it's just that A, we as consumers have shifted, and B, the way we experience these things has shifted.
But it's interesting because while this is sort of going on, the women's clothes have sort of become a lot more sculptural, more difficult to wear, things without functioning armholes. It's interesting how that has kind of taken off in parallel from what used to be kind of loose-fitting takes on men's dressing. How does that, particularly in a kind of art context and Rei's background in studying aesthetics, how does that relate to those other shifts that are going on at the kind of bottom level of Comme's price point.
I guess if you're going to look at it in a really kind of cynical way, I've always just thought these are about brand identity. Like, these clothes couldn't be by anyone else. They are so clearly Comme des Garçons that there's no way you could look at any catwalk picture and be like, oh, was that Prada? Was that? So for me, it's about brand building. They're never not going to sell any of these pieces except to a few collectors. And then they know that they can to make commercial variants and all these, which obviously the showroom, if you go in, is absolutely packed full of versions of these clothes, which are much more accessible. And then that filters all the way down to, the colour that they put on the sneaker for that season, or the collab they do with, everyone talks about, I think it was this show, it's one, the most crazy progressive show, but they're all wearing Nike sneakers, they're wearing the collab, which you can go and buy pretty much straight away. So as much as it's way up there in terms of aesthetics, it's also a very canny commercial collection, because it meant also the only other place your eye can fall is to a pair of sneakers that you can go out and buy if you've got 100 quid, I guess.
Should we have a look at the men's show then? Because I have a feeling we're going to get a serious injection of youth, which makes it different to the kind of John Hurt days. I'm only seeing these for the first time, but what's everyone's take on this party scene?
We saw the video just before we started of the. It was a bit mobbed. I mean, to see them more as like catwalk images, I guess, is a bit more telling in that way. But there was one video where it was kind of like all the models kind of stormed the stage, and it was just a lot of color, a lot of. LeMay, I think, was something else that was brought up. Yeah.
I mean, talking about recognizing Comme immediately, is this recognizably Comme? Does it matter?
I think in terms of the shapes, you can see a lot of Comme isms in there. That cut of short
culotte,
shirt with the paneling, and obviously the styling is very Comme with the Julian Dees hair. Like, I don't think you could mistake it for much else. But it definitely feels like it's shifted since. I felt like the last few seasons have been so very tailored and so very about the kind of traditions of tailoring. And this, I mean, obviously we're only looking at a little Instagram clip, but I can't see any suit jackets.
I was going to say, I walked into this even, expecting kind of, fine tailoring, because where it's still Rei, it's still going to be in some way subverted or something, but especially with the men's, it's fine tailoring, and those pieces, I mean, I have a Comme blazer, and it's one of my, favorite pieces, because I know that it's just, it's gonna look good, I think, in any kind of context, but yeah, I guess with this stuff, it's a bit more of a stretch, though.
There's a continuity in the selection of textiles, I think.
Yeah.
The fact that the textiles aren't immediately textiles you'd apply to conventional menswear, and also there's that synthetic, even from the photographs, there's that synthetic feel about a lot of it.
It even looked on like one of the basketball shorts, it might be this one, like the blue one, that like there was some kind of like surface treatment or something on it, where it was like an embroidery or some type of like,
And I think that's one of the things with Comme, as you were saying about the women's wear. I think with the menswear particularly, there are always, there are so many signifiers that you can choose from. It would be almost impossible to put a show on that wouldn't contain enough signifiers to look at it and think, oh yeah, okay, that's Rei Kawakubo. Yeah. And, the patchwork is there, the silhouette, the fabrics, the synthetic, the styling. But one of the things I like about the menswear is that you have this trajectory, you have a perceptible trajectory where you can look at what's happening now and trace lines back through to the 90s and the 80s. And maybe that's me thinking more as a fashion historian than anything else. But there's something very satisfying, I think, in seeing that in a designer's work. It's not chopping and changing from season to season. It's not Chinese this season, and it's not Romanian the next. There's some aesthetic credibility to it, I guess.
The DNA is there, and it's kind of like, I mean, it's great that it's not kind of even like immediately recognizable as, sort of her label. I think if you, gave me these images and let me sit here, with like a, 3 or 4 minutes without, prior knowledge of knowing what show it was, I would, figure it out, but.
I mean, the hair, we've remarked on the hair and the styling, and I've got to say the hair, I went to the Comme show, the Comme exhibition twice, and the second time I went back, I spent an hour just looking at the Julian D's hair pieces and photographed almost every one of them, and I think they're stunning, and I know reviewers have picked up on that as well. And maybe one of the things that's lost in the show and lost in fashion generally is this sense of collaboration that, the figurehead takes over the creativity, and actually the Julian D's work in the Met is just extraordinary. It's beautiful, really stunning. I think we saw it on the women's wear images that were up before, the kind of panscara headdresses.
Masks, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, there were some of those in the exhibition, and they were fantastic.
I mean, I remember one thing that stood out to me in terms of the Met Gala looks. Stella Tennant did a fantastic. She looked absolutely fantastic. She also got the hair right, and I saw a lot of people doing Comme which didn't get the hair right or the makeup right. The Met Gala's been a hot topic, and we have a designer who even designed a dress for the Met Gala. Unbelievable.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Who's that?
Interesting that barely anyone wore any Comme. And it's all your fault, Connor.
I think it is, yeah. I took that right away from her. We were talking about this before, and I even said that my favorite looks of the night were the actual, the people that did honor Rei, and I think a lot of the backlash, I think, surrounding the Met Gala, and, a lot of people being like, oh, what happened, what were these people wearing, was kind of centered on that idea that, like, you were expecting to see a bit more, sort of her, iconic pieces. But then I think speaks to what she makes as well, because I think a lot of people then looked at that and said, oh, I can't wear that. It is intimidating.
It really have cheapened the brand as well. I think if you'd had, some TV actress wearing a piece of Comme.
Hold on. If Kim Kardashian had showed up in a body, if Kim Kardashian had showed up in body meets dress, gingham, that would have been the most important cultural moment in the last 10 years, because she is lumps and bumps. That woman is the lumps and bumps.
But she would never wear it. I guess what I mean. I think that you'd get women who, or celebrities rather, who don't necessarily understand the cultural weight of those clothes and what they mean in terms of fashion history. If you'd put some pop star, I mean, obviously Rihanna, I guess, is an exception because she has a lot of fashion credibility from certain parts of the media.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at Katy Perry wearing Margiela, I think quite dispiriting, really. Like, what's happened to this brand? But some kind of dreadful old piece of tool's been thrown over her head, and that's apparently fashion.
I think as well with something like the Met Gala, if you're going to take a party and label it, the party of the year, there's obviously going to be a lot of politics and a lot of fashion politics that goes then, into the decision of a celebrity deciding what they're going to wear.
Well, and they don't choose, it's paid for.
Exactly, and that's the thing, I think...
6 women wear DVF because DVF have paid for 6 women to wear the clothes. It's that simple.
Or, have their perfume contract that, lasts for another 6 months, and they're, they've been said, oh, it'd be really nice, if you had worn this. That I think that, again, speaks to a lot of the frustration, I think, that people may have felt, from seeing the looks and stuff, because... yeah, you're operating at Anna Wintour's, Costume Institute. It is going to be sort of a political fashion event. And I think from what I saw, like a lot of people wearing, it's kind of even what I had expected people to wear, with, the exception of like a lot of surprises. I think Caroline Kennedy was one of my absolute favorites of the night. I think even to come in kind of with a kind of like coiffed hair, and kind of look still like New York socialite, but then this kind of like amazing, like bondagey floral dress was unbelievable. I mean, it was so exciting for me to see, at least.
I mean, speaking of the politics around that event, and we were talking about kind of Comme, whether or not they were compromising or not to put this exhibition together. I remember the infamous, I think he's called Jacques Mizagi, piece about the famous L interview.
Oh, yes.
His piece L on Earth attracted a lot of attention, sort of naming and shaming the team at L for kind of decimating his piece, but also talking about how Comme had kind of gotten in there and really created a kind of puff piece, instead of him allowing him to do an interview which was much more complex about Rei's positions on feminism and on a host of other issues. I think this is where I just thought that was very revealing, not just of the industry, but of where Comme is at right now, and how eager they are to kind of position themselves commercially. And I think you saw that play out at the Met Gala. There were just a lot of really, I don't know, tawdry looks that didn't feel like the spirit of Comme was very alive anymore. The kind of
the nature of business has changed. You know, in the 90s, Comme was a ready-to-wear label that did 2 collections a year, and that's it. And they only had to sell X amount of clothes to keep their business going. Now Comme is essentially a corporation that includes retail outlets, you know, pays for an enormous amount of other designers to produce their collections, officially and unofficially, and has an enormous amount of staff between its various stores. And
Comme came from punk. Comme came
you
from
can't be punk and be corporate at the same time.
Well then, I mean, I guess this kind of discussion comes up a lot in the panels, I think, and I guess it's this, whole discussion about commerce versus art, and I guess I'm just totally uninterested in the commerce behind brands. I don't really, and I know exactly what you're going to say. You're going to say, how are they going to be able to afford to keep designing if they can't sell the clothes? But Comme was always about contrarianism. It was always about, Rei would come up with a word, and when she talked about designing, she says that she comes up with a word and then tries to think of what the opposite of that word might be. Or when they launched the Black store, she said this was her way of injecting a bit of optimism into the world, which I thought was hilarious. It's always about standing outside of the system, and I don't think it's within the spirit of Comme
the system is that space where compromise is almost forced, isn't it? And getting back to what I said about the exhibition before, when I said it stinks of compromise, that's not critical of the Met. I think the Met did their job. The Met did what the Met is supposed to do. I suppose what I'd also like to have seen is the exhibition that Comme des Garçons would have done themselves somewhere else. You know, what would that have looked like? What would that have been? The Met show is fantastic, but obviously it's compromised because there are 2 completely different agendas. And I suppose you're talking about 2 different agendas in terms of creativity and commerce as well. And I think that coexistence relies to a degree on a level of compromise, realistically.
The art of in-between.
The art of in-between. I think
I'm not sure how many people got the art of in-between, really.
But Comme, it's not that Comme wasn't commercial when it was doing things that stood outside the industry. It's not. This often comes up, I think, on panels, and I think of creativity and commerce working in perfect unison. I don't know, Hedi Slimane for Saint Laurent. I think that was suddenly a very ingenious moment, which was ultra commercial, or Tom Ford for Gucci. I think of these moments of just utter creative genius that take commerce with them. And I don't see them as kind of forces where you need to kind of bring things down to a level in order to sell. I think that's a very pessimistic view on consumers,
How sustainable are those flashpoints? How long did Hedi Slimane last at Yves Saint Laurent? How long did Tom Ford last at Gucci? I wonder if those flashpoints actually can be sustained for a significant period of time. Or if you have that burst of creativity and you have that burst of energy, and then actually the wheels of the industry start.
Well, I would say that printing Comme des Garçons on a bag or on a white T-shirt is totally unsustainable. I think that that model can only exist for a certain number of years, because once everyone has it, there's no desirability behind it. And once you've sold that name, after that, there really is no backpedaling. That's it. So that to me seems a lot less sustainable. This kind of I don't know, just trading in on the brand's history in order to shift.
What do you think is behind the shift?
Adrian. I think Rei kind of after the marriage kind of relaxed a bit, and I think Adrian's very commercially minded, and I think he's a bloody sellout.
I think it's, but I could almost, I don't like the Comme t-shirts. I don't like the little,
I mean, when I see people with a Comme logo on a bag, it to me is the total opposite of what Comme was ever about. To print their logo on a t-shirt that's not.
It's not because they did it.
What?
It's the opposite of your idea of what Comme's about, but they did it, so...
It's the opposite of what Rei has always stood for in terms of design, what she talks about.
It's not like she died and then they did it after she died. You could say that the changes that have happened at Alexander McQueen, for example, were not what he was about, and I think that would be a fair argument to make. But she's still there. She's still the head of that company alongside Adrian. And that is what Comme's about, because it's what they're doing.
And what she stands for is newness and the unexpected. And you could maybe excuse it within that framework of that constant drive for something that's different. And maybe it'll last for a few years and then drift off onto something else.
I think it's also difficult for her to say anything because she knows that if she doesn't have that, the t-shirts, the tote bags, she couldn't do the stuff that she wanted to do. And, brings us back to square one of what we're talking about. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? And it's, I haven't come up with an answer yet. I don't know. It's, I think it's great because it's out there and it exists, and I could never be one to question the business model of either Adrian Joff or Rei Kawakubo, and I think it goes back to what you were saying of we have to, discuss it differently and approach it differently. And
I think that there's always a funny, I hear a lot of people, especially people of a certain generation, being extremely nostalgic about the industry as it was in the 90s or the early noughties, kind of the pre-conglomerate era. And everyone, people get very misty-eyed and start talking about, we used to do everything in our garage, and, we had Fiverr, but we managed to make a magazine, and, I used to make the clothes out of bin bags, but people would buy them. And I just think, well, thank God that things have changed. Now this is a serious industry. Now people can work in it. Now people get paid properly in it. Now things are made, hopefully, better. And it's a necessary evolution of an industry, which was kind of a joke. It was very creative, but it was not sustainable. And actually, nearly all of those designers who had that moment in the 90s have since burned out because what they were doing wasn't sustainable.
Who are you thinking of?
If you look at Jean-Paul Gaultier, he's perfect.
Oh, no. I love Gaultier.
Marc Jacobs has completely imploded because what he was doing hasn't sustained. McQueen, obviously for very different reasons. Galliano for different reasons. But, a lot of those people who are hailed as those kind of icons of creativity in the 90s haven't been able to sustain that trajectory. Whereas actually, Comme is one of the very few brands that has continued to grow and build and evolve because they've looked at the world around them and they've not just kind of put their head in the sand and gone, I'm a creative, I can't do anything that's not, but has any kind of touch of commerce about it, I guess.
It's a good point. I'm totally flawed. But I think what those designers represent, I guess, are flashes of kind of earth-shattering creativity. And we're talking about sustainability, and we're kind of still talking about how businesses last. And those kind of earth-shattering moments with Comme don't seem to exist anymore. Something as sort of controversial as like the Sleep collection, where you have Holocaust reminiscent garments, or you have just those moments where something shakes people up enough to I don't know, get agitated, inspire others to be creative, inspire others to do something new, to find new ways of doing things.
But the media around fashion's changed so significantly since those moments that you're talking about. And I wonder if that's a factor. You know, how do you create that same impression, that explosion with the media that we have currently and the way that fashion is consumed? I mean, the fact that we're sitting here looking at photographs live, commenting on them, that didn't happen with the collections that you're talking about. And I think that frames them, you know, maybe that frames them differently. Culturally, it frames them differently. They're not disseminated immediately. People have more time to consider them, or the opinion of particular journalists who have an ability to assess in a different way becomes the main voice, rather than maybe a host of people who are at the shows who don't have a critical vocabulary or a vocabulary that can articulate intelligently ideas that are coming down the runway.
Well, I think of when Pharrell was describing Comme at the Met Gala, when we're talking about people not being able to intellectually articulate Rei's ideas. I remember this one moment where he was talking to the BBC and he goes, "It's a woman. I mean, how amazing is that? A woman is the king of fashion." And I just thought, for all of Rei's statements on feminism and you know, how she considers herself not a feminist, and I just thought we're living in such an extreme moment where it's those T-shirts with the logo that allow people to think that, well, that sounds quite, no, hold on, I'm going to rephrase that, that gets people invested in a brand that they don't really get, and then they become the spokespeople for these brands, and we end up with a kind of superficial version of what really genuine, honest, artistic, exciting moments in our history, they just become gobbledygook. They just become symbols. They become little trophies and things like that.
I think as well, I mean, it's Rei, it's Comme des Garçons, you know, it's quite intellectual fashion that I think it's what's so great about it is it's something that's not unapproachable. I think, you know, if you wanted to go out and learn about it, you know, and if Pharrell wanted to, you know, create a, you know, kind of memorable soundbite on Rei Kawakubo, could have, you know, maybe done a bit more homework, but I think that then speaks to, you know, a lot of the processes as well. You know, it's something that's out there, it's something that's approachable, and it's something that's intellectual. I mean, what a great position to be in. You know, I think.
What do you mean when we say it's intellectual? I always struggle with that. Like,
I mean,
it's not. It always feels like it's kind of a euphemism for unattractive. Like that. That's why we think Prada's intellectual. That's why we think. Rei Kawakubo is intellectual. We think Yohji's intellectual because they make clothes but aren't attractive, conventionally attractive, I should say.
I use the word intellectual as, you know, almost interchangeably with challenging, you know, something like that. I think it's intellectual to me because it takes me a while to understand why she does what she does, you know, whether it be the women's ready-to-wear, you know, or something like that. Just because I couldn't, you know, go there mentally, you know, as my kind of first place, you know, and even kind of reading the show notes, which are always extremely vague, you know, and she won't give a lot of that away. I think, yeah, maybe me saying it's intellectual is me saying it's something that maybe I don't even entirely understand yet, which is great. I think that's amazing. I'd love to be, you know, in a position like that in fashion where, you know, it really is me kind of scratching my head, being like, yeah, what's really going on here?
I guess it sort of circles back to what we were saying at the very start, though, in that we ascribe intellectualism to it because of what we understand the brand to be. And actually, we don't know her process. We don't know, you know, from the 3 words she gives out at the end of the show, we go, oh, she means this. And actually, is it, you know?
Well, it's not Jeremy Scott for Moschino.
No, but
which is something I must clear up. I absolutely love. I love Jeremy Scott, but that is anti-intellectual fashion. It is about the fashion of It is about the fashion of the surface. It's about the fashion of consumerism, not of high thought.
But the surface and consumerism are intellectual concepts. I think you can apply intellectual critique or intellectual analysis to any designer. You can apply it to Dolce & Gabbana if you wanted to. It's just they haven't positioned themselves.
There's nothing intellectual about putting Justin Bieber on a t-shirt.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know.
They haven't
Many things you could say about that.
We're talking about people who've used the notion of conceptualism to construct brand. And to me, that was fantastic in the 90s, and they're brands I'm still interested in. But yeah, it seems a little tired.
We're looking at more images from the show. I'm quite interested in the idea of this as a kind of party scene. There's been a lot that's come up about kind of club culture in a lot of recent shows, and about, parties existing alongside designer brands, and I'm quite interested in the fact that they've decided to involve so much music and general merriment. I mean, music's always very much been involved in the Comme world, but it was sort of more the kind of Bob Dylan side of things than the kind of glitzy Studio 54 disco.
I love it. My goodness. Yes.
And it's blue glitter as well.
Yeah. Look at that. I mean, that's great. Yeah, sign me up if it's glitter.
Sorry, go on. No.
I mean, I was just going to say I'm pleasantly surprised by this. I mean, I think you can see kind of a tailored jacket there, but yeah, whatever she's covered it in, I'm obviously kind of Googling, or it's fun. I don't really know enough yet of the show notes of what she was saying with this, of what I think someone was describing the music before as club classics. So.
I mean, you think of, again, I'm going to go back into references here, but you think of Comme with the Destroy collection coming out, everyone's in a line, it's kind of marching drums, very severe. What do you think it is about the year we're in, the moment we're in now, that sort of jubilance and, I guess, hedonism is more important for them to be expressing right now than back in 1982?
I think it's just become a massive cliche to do a very severe show.
Right.
When you see all those, single banging drum and a load of really unhappy-looking models.
Yeah.
That was a statement moment of that time, which has since passed. And the kind of exciting designers of today are doing shows that make you feel something. I think, whether you look at, I know you hate them, but whether you look at Vetements, their shows are events, and...
They're not events, sorry, I won't accept that. They're not, they're a total
they're
non-event.
no longer shows anymore as well, which...
I remember when Demna came out with that, he did like a little interview with Sarah Moore about how he's no longer doing oversized hoodies or whatever. He said, very arrogantly, I've done a show in a church, I've done a show in a restaurant, I've done a show in a sex club, now, as if he was the first designer to ever think of doing these types of things. I've always seen those shows as utter non-events. They've been in very predictable locations.
I guess that
they've
what I
never
mean
really...
is the sort of pendulum swings between people wanting to do very minimal, stripped-back shows, which was certainly the vogue for a while, and now we've seen it going back the other way towards what Martine Rose is doing, what Balenciaga have been doing, what Vetements is doing, what Charles Jeffrey does.
But these are, I mean, Martine Rose, who I think is one of the best talents we have in London right now, I wasn't super impressed with that last show, but really, I mean, it was in a climbing wall environment, which looks great when the clothes are photographed, but I suppose the level of event production around these shows has kind of disappeared since we're consuming them so much through that still image. And that's something I really miss about fashion shows, and something that is I'm not just a kind of purist who only thinks of like iconic early shows. I think of a brand like Hood by Air does really provocative, big events. For example, they did a show in LA with a huge sand dune. They had all the models kind of running through, fighting each other while a singer, Yves Tumor, was doing a full set. These kind of really actually provocative events seem to be kind of lacking. I mean, particularly in Paris, it's not really there anymore. Is that, I mean, go ahead. I mean, have we lost that just because so much of this is consumed through Instagram and through these types of images?
Now you have to get the picture, like you didn't once upon a time, I suppose. You know, Comme can do a show with disco lights and boys walking in every which direction, but they have to make sure they have these images at the end, or they don't sell the collection. And that's a pressure which didn't used to exist, and I think that doesn't certainly inform how theatrical you can be. I also think that is also become a bit of a cliche, doing a very, we're going to have dancers, we're going to have line dancing, and we're going to have be a buffet, like whatever. It's become, that all became very tiring, I think, especially for the press who had felt like they'd seen it and done it. And it.
I thought an even more kind of a controversial Hood by Air show even was the one that he presented during Couture Week, the men's Couture Week, because those images weren't released, and they made a point of saying, you know, these images will not be released. And I remember for weeks after that, I think if we're talking about these kind of, you know, can you create these kind of, you know, big, you know, controversial 90s, you know, talking points in fashion anymore, and I think that kind of came the closest to it, just in not releasing the information, because
that really made me roll my eyes.
Really?
Why don't you just not do we're just going to not do a show because that's controversial. We're just not going to show clothes.
That's what people are saying now.
But it does challenge.
Well, even Rei is actually saying that. I think Rei was describing her women's clothes, and she said the most controversial thing now would be to do not clothes, and this is one of the themes in the Met is clothes versus not clothes, and this is why we see all these kind of more sculptural pieces. And isn't that more shocking right now, to be doing something that sits completely outside of this? You know, here's image 36, here's image 37.
I suppose I think there is a requirement. You are a clothing brand at the end of the day. You have a requirement to make.
You sound like an arch capitalist.
Well, but you know, you can say we're not making clothes, but they are. They're just not presenting clothes. So the clothes are all there in the showroom. It's not like they're saying we're going to take a season out. We're going to close Comme des Garçons because we're punk. It's still operating within the system. It's a very superficial form of, you know, we're being different. And it's actually, I don't think it is that original. You know, if you look at old McQueen shows, nothing they ever made was presented. You know, the stuff that they showed wasn't the stuff that they sold. It's kind of tale as old as time. You know, half of what Dolce puts on the catwalk isn't made. So I don't know that it is that.
But Comme des Garçons always used to say that everything that was on the runway was available to buy in the shops. And I think they maybe still do that, but maybe there's one of each in each shop. But it was always something that they kind of clung to as part of a brand value.
And you can even hear kind of people that have been taken under the wing of, you know, their of Adrian. You know, Jacquemus is someone that I could even quote. I think in the last season that they presented, he made a point of saying in his show notes, everything that you see here, you know, we sell, and he was quite proud of it as well. And I think
that's someone who should definitely stop selling his clothes.
Just stop. Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. I think him and kind of Jonathan Anderson and possibly even Phoebe at Celine should just kind of roll into one. Phoebe can do the women's wear, Jonathan can do the men's, and Jacquemus can do a kind of diffusion version of both.
You should get better at expressing your opinion.
I think to each his own, but I think what's happening now is it's out there, and I think what's so great about fashion and about, you know, the time that we're in is that it is out there, and that we can't do much to the contrary. You know, that they're going to put it out there no matter not. I mean, you know, and we are still sitting here on a panel, you know, discussing it. So I think that does say something.
Well, I'm going to say we are no longer sitting here on a panel discussing it because I'm going to close this discussion. It's been very fruitful. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.